concept of cinematic game seems to be inescapable. Every so often we go back to this idea of making a game feel more cinematic, most recently with The Order 1886 and The Evil Within. And I don't think this is inherently a bad idea. Emulating properties from other media can make for interesting work. It's one of the reasons I love Scott Pilgrim so much. But this concept is often refuted because this is a very surface level idea of what makes something cinematic. Throwing a letterbox on it and some movie-like camera angles don't make something authentically emulate cinema. I feel like games like these have ignored something pretty crucial to make a piece of media truly cinematic: editing. Editing, or the lack of it, already has its own space in games outside of attempting a cinematic quality. Think of cutting away from information you might want to see in a horror game. And with regards to a lack of editing, first-person shooters often have uncut streams of gameplay for whole levels, or in Half-Life's case, uncut through the whole game. And I think there's an argument for not having any editing in games, since games don't have to deal with the limitation of moving a physical camera around. And this can be seen in God of War, where the camera is repositioned at all sorts of angles without any cuts. But I want to explore what can be done with editing that not only emulates movies, but integrates it within the gameplay as well. And for that, 30 Flights of Loving does it best. What I find the most interesting about 30 Flights is the juxtaposition of playable sections and how they relate to each other, keeping track of when images are repeated and why they're repeated. If you'd like an in-depth history of the games in the Citizen Able series, which 30 Flights is one of, please watch Aaron Signal's video covering Blendo Games' gamography, and all of the other work Aaron Signal does. He's pretty great. 30 Flights of Loving deconstructs a standard narrative timeline through smash cuts, ellipses, and surrealistic time lapses, and creates a blurred understanding of what is actually real and present, especially when certain details aren't the same from scene to scene. Why does Anita have a robot arm when we first see her, but then in the flashback, she doesn't? How did she get it? Oh. So tying these moments together with any sort of visual or audible cue is really important to help explain the actual chronological storyline. Almost every cut has some sort of mask or signifier to connect to the next scene. When carrying Winston through the crowd of people, he coughs at the moment the scene cuts to a different point in the tunnel. Keeping your personal sense of time relatively intact by showing that this is still the same area, but further along the path. But my favorite cut is the one right after that previous one. Proceeding down the hall, there's an accelerated clock, reinforcing the idea of an abnormal representation of time. But rounding that corner, you're cut to a different room that matches the clock's frame position, and the ticking of the clock from the previous room is translated into the sound of the flight tracker. This cut reminds me a lot of Satoshi Kon's work, since he worked extensively with match cuts to blend scenes together, like bringing characters back to the present from a flashback or imagined reality. And this is something that 30 Flights uses for its main flashback as well, but with audio and motion cues rather than a pure graphic match. It's a smash cut to a whole new time and area, but it's connected by carrying over the sound from pushing the cart with Winston in it to the next scene. And at the end of the flashback, it pulls you back to the present by fading in that same cart noise. And these edits aren't triggered by any measurement of time, but rather your own movement and positioning. The movement part of that actually helps match the cuts by keeping your momentum into the next scene, and that's something that can only be done in games. Like this ellipsis that occurs during the main flashback. Standing at the far end of the room shows the clock at 5:21 in the morning, but moving down the hall jumps the clock to 7:53 at night and pops in both Anita and Winston. Or walking outside to the sound of sirens, and not until you're fully outside does it cut you to the chase scene. So piecing together those scenes and images is now related to your movements as well. So you think about why moving towards Anita, both when approaching her after the party and when returning to your position in the original smash cut of the game, directly causes the cuts to falling down the air vent and returning to pushing Winston in the cart. And then how that relates to the lineage of the narrative. The same goes for matching transitions and the relation of the subsequent image shown. So we see this cut, and later on, and these cuts sometimes happen so fast that some details can be missed. Like in those inserts, it's easy to see what Anita does, but it's also easy to miss the second sniper behind those letters, who is the same woman from the party, also seen laying in the same bed you approached Anita in. It's not a simple structure. There's no dialogue cueing you into... Well, no coherent dialogue cueing you into what's explicitly happening. So the pieces are given to you jumbled, and you'll have to put it together yourself, guided by the correlations between the edits. And it's the mixing of the styles of cinema and games that's the most important part of 30 Flights. And I think those match gameplay cuts are the most interesting to work with, especially in first-person games. The animation frames can be matched while the surroundings change. It's disorienting but fluid, and something I actually played around with in that Mirror's Edge video I did. So when looking into what other media can be integrated into games, try not to leave it at such a surface-level adaptation. Look at what differentiates the media being borrowed from, and see how that can be integrated into what makes games different.